How can we put this in?
Are we ready? Okay. Good evening and welcome. I will hereby call to order this meeting of the Merrimack School Board in special session this Tuesday, January 23rd, 2007. The modified agenda this evening has a purpose of two full items that both address warrant articles. In the first phase, we welcome to the table the consideration of the energy management warrant proposal. The Energy Management Subcommittee members are joining us. Again, we're joined by Jim Lucy of Honeywell, Wally Howe, also of Honeywell, and Planning and Building Committee member Shannon Barnes. School Planning and Building Committee member Lori Rothaus also served on this committee but was unable to make it this evening for the presentation and discussion due to earlier commitment that she's made to the Nashua School District Budget Committee, where she is an administrator. We also are calling on the expertise of our subcommittee members this evening, Jody Valancourt and George Markwell, who met with our representatives from Honeywell and Shannon, as well as our district management director, Shirley LeMay. And is Shirley still on hand? She stepped out? Okay. I think that the discussion this evening is a timely one. As you know, I do get magazines from time to time in my box, and at the very last official board meeting that we held, our regularly scheduled one, in the Source for Facilities Decision Makers Buildings magazine, the January issue, one of the items was 10 steps to a strategic energy plan. And of those 10 steps, I think that the plan tonight accomplishes 5 of them very clearly, a 6th one potentially, and then there are some others that just seemingly haven't applied to a project of this scope that deal with things like biothermal and other large-scale things that our district just wouldn't possibly be able to consider at this time. So if anybody would like to take a look at that, I'll just keep it on hand and you can take it. But I'm sure that we'll look forward to consideration of some of the energy items that come before us this evening. In your package, you should all have received a copy of the options A, B, and C. And with no further ado, I'm going to call on Jim and our Energy Management Subcommittee group to talk about those options that lay before us this evening. If you would, Jim.
Hello. We had two sessions with the committee and had a lot of discussion where we got into a lot of detail in the proposal. Since we last met with you, we had provided you, which I see a lot of you brought with you, a larger binder which got into a lot more detail around the overview presentation that we did initially. As a result of the meetings, the group asked us to put together 3 revised financial options, which are called options A, B, and C, which I want to review with you this evening. And Wally and I are here to address any questions that you might have. The first option, which we're calling option A, is really very similar to the initial 10-year self-funded proposal that we presented to you. We'd made a couple of revisions to that where we had identified during the construction of the project, which we project to be around a 12-month period of time, that as we do various projects, lighting retrofit, for example, some will be done before others. As a result of that, we will start to accumulate, which we had not put a number to at the original meeting, a level of energy savings. We went back after the first session with the subcommittee and calculated, or second session, excuse me, and calculated what that would be, and then made a revision in the 3 options that we're presenting to you tonight. And that's the major change here in this first one, option A. And as you can see, and you have the handouts there, what we've done is made a couple of changes. We've changed up here the fiscal year periods that these payments would be occurring in. And we've also added here in the first year, which is really the construction period, which would start to occur this July of '07. Here was the number that we calculated out of the total savings of $262,012. We've determined during that construction period of time, $162,362 will be fall to the bottom line, if you will, in the form of energy savings. So at the direction of the committee, we have taken that amount and used that as a way to make a more aggressive payment schedule in the project to reduce project interest costs overall. And that would be set up here where once you would enter into a possible contract with us in the financing, the construction paid savings for the interest would be used as an initial payment. Once we're done with the work, your payments would then commence throughout the 10-year period as we had originally prescribed. This is very similar again to the original 10-year, same project amount, $3,489,988. We would then finance less the utility rebate of $151,254, and that, including the savings for the construction period, there would be a total of 11 payments over the term. 10 of those would be annual payments, which would happen once all of the work's installed. Kind of to get to the net here, the bottom line of this would be, you can see as far as the budget impact to the district of this initial investment to do the upgrades to accumulate the efficiencies that we've proposed would be a net cost of 0 in year 1, and then you'd start to accumulate some positives of a little over about $23,000 net cost of 0 in the construction period, about $23,000 to the good in the first year, going out through the 10-year term, in this example of a little over $300,000 in a positive cash flow over the term. So this was the first option, option A, that was considered from the committee that we were asked to put together. And again, with the exception of adding in that construction period savings amount and payment, it's really identical to the scope of work and the overall proposal that we presented initially to you. Any questions? So this is a further breakdown of this. This is similar format again that we presented the initial project in. When you look at the total construction cost, you have just shy of $3.5 million worth of improvements taking place. Interest cost over the 10-year term is $856,000. So your total construction cost all in is about $4,346,000. And then the offsetting revenues of that over each year or the total term of the project. In energy cost of avoidance, which is a guaranteed savings amount, that's about $3.5 million over the 10-year term. Building aid, which is 30% of the construction cost, is paid by the state at $1,046,000. Utility rebate, which is money coming from both PSNH and Keyspan Gas Company, about $151,000, totaling $4,656,000. And you can see again, it's about $300,000 or so in positive cash flow. So that was the first option we considered. Same scope of work that we had originally presented to the board. And then we considered, the board asked us to come back, or the subcommittee asked us to come back with another option, which we're calling option B.
Jim, could I stop you just for one moment and just draw back to option A? My understanding that it was the same as presented in our books as the 10-year project.
Correct.
In that big book on page 63, where I've been working off the financial overview, there's an inconsistency between that slide or the page for option A versus what's in the book. In the interest costs, a difference of approximately $12,000, where it's more on our handout in your slide here.
Correct.
Versus what's printed, as well as through the guaranteed energy cost avoidance. That seems to be more along the lines of about $160,000.
Yeah. It's a good question, and I failed to point that out as a difference. We initially had figured an interest rate of 4.1%. When I went back after the subcommittee's request to run some new financial numbers, I got a new interest rate at market rates of about 4.35%. After consultation with Matt, it was determined that it's better to go with a higher rate to be hopefully a little more conservative. Interest rates are something that we can't control here. So the difference you're seeing in your initial figures to where we're at today is that we had initially a 4.1% interest rate that the financing was figured on. Today, and the numbers I'm presenting to you, it's figured on a 4.35% fixed interest rate.
Okay, thank you.
That's something that we could get to down the road, it could go back to 4.1, it could change. They're just conditions that are out of our control.
Okay, thank you.
So option B that we've presented as a result of the committee's request really is the same scope of work as the original 10-year project. But what we did here in this example is we said, if we kept your initial payments, and just look here at of this first project, once everything's installed, you get to the full payment amount. If we kept these numbers the same as we originally proposed them in the initial project presentation to you, and then added in this $162,000 additional payment, which is made up of, or the money comes from, the savings accrued during the construction project, how much more of a project could you fund up front to start to deal with some of the additional building improvements that we addressed, such as some of the ventilation upgrades in your buildings? So what this does, it says you could come up with, if you look at the total project cost here, $3,608,000 versus the $3,489,000, which is about $120,000 difference. And this example is saying that we still develop a positive cash flow over the project term, but this would allow you, as an example, to free up another $120,000 worth of capital money to then prioritize and say, we want to spend that to start dealing with some of our CIP type improvements that were identified in the full report. And as you know, in the full report, we kind of broke each building into two areas. One was the scope that's included in the self-funded project, that original 10-year one that we proposed. And then there was a back section of each building that talked about capital improvement type items that we had identified in the audit that weren't part of our original budget. And those were things like areas in the buildings that you don't have code compliant ventilation, or just equipment that's at the end of its useful life, that at some point in time you're going to have to spend money in your budget to deal with, whether it's an emergency scenario where something's broke, you got to fix it, or it's a planned budget expenditure that you seek to do because something's worn out or failing. So this is an example or an option that just shows you how you could still have a self-funded positive cash flow project, but use a little bit more of those savings numbers, if you will, to free up a larger construction project to the tune of another $120,000 here to then prioritize on doing some of those project improvements. Any questions? Yes.
Rose?
One of the, I guess, my concerns early on, and it was actually an item that was pulled out of Shirley's proposed budget, had to do with cleaning of the air ducts. And so what you're talking about with this second option, it would include some of those projects such as the air quality in the schools? Yeah,
I'm saying it could include them, where now you would have in this example another $120,000, $150,000, whatever the number would be, to say, okay, how do we want to spend that? Do we want to spend that on the duct cleaning? Do we want to spend that on new ventilation equipment? Do we want to spend that on the Master Cola office capital project and so on? That's something that you'd have that flexibility then, and then we would work with you to prioritize what's the best way to spend those dollars.
Okay. And what is the likelihood, just based on maybe past experience with other projects, that as you get into some of these things, you'll find other things that are extreme areas of concern? Or do you feel like the study that was done, that was put forward to us, is everything that we should be concerned about? I mean, do you think, just from past practice and doing this with other businesses or schools, do you end up in a situation where you find more things that need to be addressed than initially had been?
Yeah, it's a good question. Let me give you somewhat of a long answer to it. I think in the areas that we looked at, again, as I defined it in our last meeting, energy infrastructure, which is basically your heating, your ventilation, your air conditioning systems in your buildings, the controls on those systems that control how they run, and then the building shell or envelope as far as the insulating characteristics and so on that can impact your energy cost. Those areas that we looked at from an energy conservation standpoint or on the heating and ventilating standpoint, where you may have some older equipment that's worn out or ventilation that's not code compliant, I think we've got a pretty thorough list that's all encompassing.
Okay.
It's not to say that we wouldn't get into designing some of those things and for us to determine, we've got, it's going to take us a little more money than maybe we originally thought to get there if we look at those projects above and beyond we've already proposed. Okay. But I think it's a pretty comprehensive list as we sit here today of the challenges you're facing in that level of focus of areas within your buildings. So the things we didn't look at, I can't comment on that. But in our targeted focus, I think it's pretty comprehensive. And that's today's snapshot. If we look at 5 years down the road, you may have things may have 5 more years worth of wear and tear on them, and that list could grow. So, okay. But I think it's a pretty solid reflection of where we sit today.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions about the option B plan as outlined before us? Okay, Jim?
Just to quickly go through option B, and this is the same kind of format I had in the other ones, outlining your construction cost, again, to be able to have a little larger project here, a little more interest that's accrued because it's a larger project. So here's your total construction cost with principal and interest, if you will. And then here's your overall revenues, which are very similar. The state aid goes up because it's in proportion to the project cost. Project cost is a little bit higher here, so the 30% of that is a little bit greater. But you can see it still cash flows with about $200,000 to the good at the end of that 10-year term. So the last option that we put together at the request of the committee was to look at, originally we had presented to you 2 initial scenarios. One was a 10-year project. The other was a 15-year example. And in that one, it was basically giving you the example that if you wanted to go out another 5 years using your savings as a way to free up more money up front, if you will, in that example, you could fund about another $1.2 million worth of upgrades to then target back to some of the additional improvements that were identified to start dealing with some of those issues. At the committee's request, we've looked now at a 12-year option versus a 15. So that's what option C is. It's basically taking from option A and B. Those are 10 years. This is going out another 2 years with the idea that it would give you a larger pot of money, if you will, to deal with some of these capital improvement type items that you will be facing or are facing. So as we look at this, the big difference here is, as opposed to the original option, for the last one, we're now able to fund a project of $4,235,355, which is about $750,000 larger than the original option A. Following the same format here, we're financing less this rebate amount, so you're financing $4,084,000, using the construction savings as your first payment amount, and then following that out over time over the remaining 12-year term. And you can see, bottom line here, you're still in the positive here as far as this project not costing you any upfront money beyond what you would normally spend in energy dollars or any additional money. And this is being completely funded here through state building aid, guaranteed energy savings, and then utility rebates. So just stretching it out another 2 years to give you a little more money up front to then target at capital improvement type projects that you will be facing in the district. And then to just take it to this next kind of way to describe it. In this example, option C, total construction cost, principal and interest, and then we get down in here to revenues, offsetting revenues, about $4.3 million in the energy savings over the 12-year period. This includes the initial construction, Building aid is at a higher amount, again, because it's 30% of this project, so $1,270,000 in building aid. Utility rebate is the same, and you can see you're still in a positive scenario over the 12-year term of about $200,000. So as a result of the subcommittee and a lot of dialogue of us going into a lot more detail around the scope of work improvements, the rationale, what we found in the survey process, and what's included in here, this was really the three options that the group asked us to come back with, and happy to certainly address questions that you might have that we can answer for you.
Okay. What I'd like to do at this time is just entertain any discussion or questioning about the documents that we have before us, and then I'd like to move into discussion with each of the people who served on the subcommittee to hear perspective and pros and cons about each of the options that are presented and the process that you went through in learning about each of the options. So at this time, are there any questions from the board about any of the materials before us, the scope of the project, or the challenges that each option places on the district? Seeing none, we'll agree that we... Oh, Jennifer?
Sorry, I was wondering if George was going. I
might have a question.
Okay, all right. I'm going to go back to the very beginning, kind of back to the basics here for my benefit, but also for the benefit of the general public. If it can be explained, the dollar amount that this, for instance, option A will require upfront, and then will that continue on for the next 10 years if we choose that 10-year plan or the 12-year plan? But just speaking in terms of option A,
Matt?
Am I expressing that correctly? Is that clear?
When you look at option A, and Jim, you can help me out if I don't get this correct, the first year's payment would be $162,362. Then after that, the payments would be $343,000, around $300,000 to $450,000 towards the end of the term. You can see that on the second to the last line. However, Honeywell's proposal is the money that we're paying as far as the investment for this is going to be offset by energy savings or cost avoidance. So instead of paying money to PSNH or to Irving Oil or to the other utilities, we'd be funding this project. So it's a cost shift, basically.
Okay, so what normally would be recognized at the end of the year as a surplus, as a cost saving, because we wouldn't be expending what was budgeted, would go towards funding this project?
For the 07-08 year, I would imagine so, yes.
Okay.
For any other budgets that we do build, we would see a reduction in our utility rates equal or greater than the amount of the payment to Honeywell.
Okay.
Jennifer, if I can just jump in too, the way that I've read the chart is that cost avoidance is almost like a revenue. It's almost money that we're earning, but it's really that we just don't have to spend it. We avoid the cost of it.
Right.
So all of those items that are above that first bar, where it says cost avoidance in the middle there, is what we really don't have to spend. The program investment section, where it says total annual investment, is what we have to spend each year. Under Plan A, B, and C, every one of those authorize a payment of $162,362. There's no difference in the first year.
Right.
It's only as you go out through that investment that you see them changing. But again, in options B and C, there's very little change until you get to the 10th year, and that's only because we've extended it 2 more years. So B and C are very similar on what you have to spend each year until that, at the end of the term. Similarly, the cash flow, if you look at the very bottom and compare all 3 of the charts, the cash flow is what we should realize back between the cost avoidance, what we avoided spending, and what we actually did spend on the changes here in the work that's done. How did I do, Matt? Getting better?
Did very well, yeah.
Okay.
It's almost, you almost have to kind of look at it like, if I'm paying $1 million for utilities, For the, let's say 0809 budget, I'd budget, let's say, $700,000 for utilities and $300,000 for the Honeywell payment.
Okay, so that would be a budgeted amount then, this, for instance, the
Oh, yeah.
343.
Absolutely.
This would not go back into another warrant in the 0809?
No, it would flow right into
ballot.
the operating budget, yes.
Okay, all right, that was my other concern was, so this will be a one-time warrant if it goes to that. This will be a one-time warrant for the $162,362, and that's it. It will not be up for another option.
No, it wouldn't be a warrant article every single year. Just
Okay.
year one with the first payment and then naming the number of years. We'd have to do a lot of work as far as a voter's guide went to show people exactly what the payments would be per year. Because
Yeah,
right now, when you look at the wording of the warrant article, looks like a pretty inexpensive proposition,
Well,
but
it
you don't
does,
realize
yes.
that
Yeah,
it's going to
that was
cost
my
so
concern.
much. So we'd have to do some education. And the wording of the warrant article is something that I just took from the Department of Revenue Administration recommended wording for warrant articles. So it's nothing I cooked up by myself.
Right.
It's something that was given to me by them.
Okay.
But you're right. We would have to list out the annual payments, list out the term, list out the total. Essentially, we do that at deliberative session. We do it in a voter's guide also.
Right, okay. So if I understand it correctly, then, because the money is going back into the project, the savings is going back into the project, the budget itself won't recognize a decrease because, or it will.
Technically, we should be seeing a decrease in the utilities that we're budgeting for.
In the utility line item, but on the bottom line budget amount.
On the bottom line, you're guaranteed not to have an overage. You wouldn't see a decrease. You could see a decrease, but it's not guaranteed by Honeywell.
If you, we guarantee, in this example, up to the program cost. So if we exceeded the savings, you keep the difference to the good. The other thing that we talked about in the subcommittee is, which we haven't calculated at all, is there's going to be probably a lot of intangible savings that we don't know where they are right now. And what I mean by that is we're proposing to really replace all the lights throughout the district as one example. Right now, you have the lighting systems you have is a variety of years of age, and the maintenance department will budget an amount of money to repair a lamp that's burned out, or a ballast that's kind of like the battery of the fixture that's failed. That costs money. But when we put new stuff in, those replacement dollars will go away for a while or be reduced. So there's going to be some operational impacts here, because you're investing $3.5 million into your buildings of new stuff, and we're replacing a lot of old stuff. So that'll impact you in a positive way that we don't have figured here. So that's another thing to think about or consider.
Okay.
Jody, did you have a comment?
I just wanted to say something, and hoping that it might help make things clearer. The savings that we will be realizing, we wouldn't be realizing these savings if we don't spend the money on these projects. So the only way we're going to be realizing these savings is if we do these capital improvements, if we spend the money on these projects. So I just want people to understand, if that's confusing to them, these savings will not happen if we don't do this work. If we don't do this work, based on this information that's been presented to us, we are still going to be spending this money. We're just going to be spending it by paying higher energy costs. The other thing I wanted to explain too is this $162,000 payment that we're talking about during the construction year. That money is money that is going to be savings that we'll realize during energy management, because as we talked about, some of the priorities are going to be like lighting and things like that that are going to be done right away. We will see an immediate savings on energy that first year from that equipment being installed. Now, we wouldn't have a payment until the following year when the construction year is over. So here we've got this $162,000 savings. What Matt was proposing is that we should put that money down so that we have less interest over the term of the loan. So instead of having that money come in as just savings, putting in the budget, we could apply that to buy down the principal as a possibility.
Plus, if I can add, one of the reasons why the 162 is there is I can't have a warrant article for a lease purchase with no money in 07-08 if we're talking about the 07-08 budget. So we needed a payment down in that year. I couldn't have the first payment be in 0809 and have it on this warrant that we're voting on in April. To further confuse the issue, sorry.
Yeah, if you think too hard about it, it really escapes you. Yeah, I think I understand that. Now, another question that I had was that the lease agreement contains an escape clause. What does that mean?
That's if the money isn't, well, Jim can explain the...
Yeah, another way to put that is they call it non-appropriation clause, and it's by law, you have to have a non-appropriation clause in a lease purchase. And lease purchase is much different than a lease. A lease, you go lease a car, you may pay a lot of money, but at the end of the day, you got a big buyout of the car. Lease purchase is, very similar to a bond. At the end of the lease term, you have a dollar buyout. So it's, it's truly buying principal and interest down. But what a non-appropriation says is that in any fiscal year period, 12 months, that you non-appropriate, don't appropriate the money to pay for this annual payment. By law, you don't have to appropriate it. I mean, it's basically long and short of it. You don't have to. Now, it's not recommending you do that. I'm not aware in my 15-year career of anybody that's ever done that. It's kind of like filing Chapter 11. I mean, once you do that once, you're going to, the next time you want to go borrow money, it'll affect your credit rating. But technically, you could non-appropriate in any year of this project and not pay back the loan. And that's just part of the legalese, if you will, of a lease purchase type transaction.
Matt?
So
if I could just kind of elaborate a little. If you didn't have that, it would be more like a bond issue. And if it was like a bond issue, you'd have to have a 60% majority. This only gives you the opportunity to have a 50% majority because, as Jim said, there is an escape clause. So if the board didn't appropriate money a particular year for this lease, we wouldn't be held liable for it.
Okay.
And one of the other differences is in a bond, you pledge the full faith and credit of every asset the district owns. So if you defaulted on the bond and the bond was for the new middle school, they could go after the equity of the high school to get their money back. In a lease purchase, it's just on what you're borrowing for. So, technically, you can't go after the high school if the high school's not part of the project. It's just on the stuff you're borrowing. So that's some of the reasons I think it gets back to the majority versus the simple majority versus the super majority vote. So,
okay. All right. So,
interest-wise, they're very similar.
All right. And a couple more questions. So when the district would truly realize a savings on the bottom line budget would be after the 10 or the 12-year project end date?
To truly realize the savings, yeah, after everything's paid off, correct.
Okay. All right. I totally forgot my last question there. It'll come back to me. Thanks.
Further questions, comments from the board? Rose?
The scope of the work that we're going to be taking on as a result of the savings or the cost avoidance, cost shifting, those are things that eventually, that we need to take care of, period. And so, I can see why, this is a good program to offer to the voters as an option. And I'm not sure which option is the best. I personally, it makes sense from a standpoint, because it's a big project to begin with, that when we look at option C, we're looking at the possibility of being able to get a lot more taken care of that needs to be taken care of in the long term, and we're realizing the state building aid to go towards it. And I think, that right there is a great cost savings when you look at the total piece of the project of option C. Hopefully the other things that were on the list or recommendations that we'll be able to take care of in those circumstances. Even though it's a longer term project and of course more money, I think the flip side of it is that we're going to realize more savings as a result of the state aid and just staying on a course and, truly taking care of what needs to be taken care of and just saying, you know, this is a priority, and, you know, our facilities, you know, are so important to us. And it's, you know, I think it's huge that, you know, we're taking care of stuff before it's in emergency situations.
We talked about at the committee, or I tried to stress that we're trying to provide you financial summaries or information that's based upon tangible numbers. And what I mean specifically there is we're talking about sources that we know and really can guarantee. We know you're 30% state aid receiver, and we know state aid applies on these jobs. We know that we can measure and verify, and we're willing to guarantee the energy reductions, and we know what the rebate programs are available out there. What we don't know, and what we don't want to put on a spreadsheet and make a bunch of promises that we can't, you don't know what the numbers are going to be, is the intangibles. And that, you know, that's some of the things I think you're referring to. That's the operational savings, or, you know, when you're going to be facing CIP amounts next year, year after, or whatever it may be. And obviously, the longer you wait to do work, you know, it's not going to, the price doesn't go down each year. So you could certainly build a case that there's some other kind of things, but you don't want to make decisions upon that because you don't know when those are going to hit your budget. And so we've tried to build this around tangible things that we know and can base decisions on.
Further questions or comments from the board? Okay, with that, I'm going to assume that there's understanding of the scope, the sequence.
I have one question.
I'm sorry, go ahead, George.
Do you have the numbers for the 15-year plan on your spreadsheet still?
I do.
Versus the 12?
I do.
Can I see them quickly?
Yep.
You have them?
I get them at the end here. Oh. Sorry, I wasn't totally organized for that, but
That's all right.
no. And this, yeah, I don't have, George, I don't have this adjusted for the construction payment, which would arguably only improve it, but this was the cash flow for the 15. This was the other breakdown way here of, in this example, we were saying construction cost here, you could get up to about, you know, $4,650,000, maybe even a little higher. This is a typo, but this is over the 15-year term. So you can see the longer you go out, you know, the more interest that starts to accrue. So here's your total cost, and then here's your savings over the 15-year period. This excludes the 162. Building aid is a higher amount because it's a percentage of a larger project number. And as you can see here, in this example, it would fund close to $1.2 million more. Yeah, and this is also on the interest rate of 4.1 versus the 4.35 we've updated. So I did not update these following the last subcommittee meeting, but it's still a pretty good reflection of how things would net out. The interest rate increase would largely be offset with the $162,000 construction savings payment that you could make. So.
Okay.
George, if you flip to page 63 in the second of the books, the larger one.
I don't have that with me.
Oh. If you
Okay.
check on Jen's, it has the 10-year right on top of the 15-year, so it makes an easy analysis for you.
It's almost like $1 million difference.
Yep.
All set, George? Okay. Further questions? Comments, further discussion? Okay, with that then,
I remembered my last question. When would that interest rate be locked in? You've thrown around a couple different interest rates. Would that be after the vote? Would it be upon initiation of the project?
Yeah, usually the lock-in period, there's a certain grace period that the finance companies, if you will provide. So so whether that's 30 days or whatever it may be. So I think it somewhat would have to align itself when and if there is a project approval, we would want to try to lock that at the right time and certainly take advantage of that right time as much as possible. So whether that's as soon as we have an opportunity, if it's a good rate, we grab it, or we wait a little bit longer as it takes us to maybe finish up some of the paperwork end of things. But
And that's approval by the voters, correct? Not necessarily that we have approved putting it on the ballot?
I mean, we could lock it at any time. I think it's going to tie that they're only going to be able to lock a rate for a certain length of time. And if you lock it too early, then you may be assuming that that rate is going to be good when it may expire. So I think it has to be somewhat aligned to an approval date, and when and if you get to that point, a period of time we know we can lock a rate and commit to it.
Right. Matt, do you have other knowledge of nuances to what schools are governed by in terms of lock-in rates, or anything that we need to know about in moving it towards the ballot and voter approval on the 11th of April?
Well, I would think you would probably not want to get to that point, because that kind of says that you're committing in some fashion. So you'd probably want to wait until April 11th, I would say.
12th.
12th? 12th, sorry.
We'll
Okay.
wait for the day after the vote.
All right, and that's exactly what I was getting at. Thank you.
Because really, Jen, the warrant article would be that the voters approve that the district enter into this lease-buy agreement over the scope of 10 years, 12 years, whatever we put forward today.
Right.
So we're really not going to put the cart before the horse and suggest that the voters will automatically approve this.
Right, and that was another concern of mine, that we would be locking into something and possibly paying a penalty if it didn't pass. Okay, thank you.
Further questions, comments? George?
One last one. It looks like on the 10-year plan versus the, or option A versus option C, it looks like the actual benefit is really the additional state aid, is what you're, to actually fund those improvements to ventilation that you were talking about doing.
Yeah, I think you could submit, if you see it this way, that the benefit would be if you agree that you have additional work that needs to be done beyond what we're accomplishing in this self-funded project, like the stuff we pointed out in the audit, that this would be a way, an enabler for you to get state aid on it. So as opposed to you paying locally $100 every, 100% of each dollar, you're going to pay 70 cents on each dollar because you're getting 30% building aid.
Yes, but will the interest offset that savings on the additional 2 years?
You could say the interest would offset it, but I would argue or submit that would at least be, the interest would at least be partially offset by the fact that if you're able to do that work this year versus next year or the year after, construction costs probably are going to go up conservatively, 5% a year. And so every year you wait, you're going to be dealing with that compounding effect as well. So, it's hard, George, to really pinpoint how the numbers are going to flow out, but it's certainly, one could say that's going to allow you to free up more money to tackle an issue that perhaps a learning environment issue. It's something you want to deal with up front sooner rather than later. You're going to get building aid on it. The sooner you do it, I think we'd all agree it's not going to cost any cheaper next year. And so how that affects interest, I don't 100% know. But I understand your point.
Out of the scope of this project, if we were to do that additional work, we would not qualify for state aid on that, building aid?
Down the road?
Yes.
So if you didn't do it now, you did it later?
Let's say we did just the energy portion of it, where we were utilizing lighting savings and heating equipment savings, and didn't do the ventilation portion. Could we, at a later point, whether it's Honeywell or whoever, do the ventilation work and still be eligible for that building aid?
I believe you could,
Okay.
but it's something to go to Ed Murdo at the Department of Education to confirm that. But
Matt, what's your experience on that?
Yeah, this would really, Jim is right, we'd have to check with Ed Murdo at the state. He's the building aid head, so he would have to give us a review on that.
Because it appears on the 10-year plan, the cash flow is significantly higher than the 12-year plan. And if we could work the other improvements into other capital improvement plan projects as we go ahead anyway with other stuff, and not lose that state aid, it looks like it almost looks like option A is better on cash flow.
Well, you're
It looks like your
financing.
money is going to be better in A than the other options. And I was just curious, whether that additional $200,000 or $300,000 will be of significant benefit on this program for 12 years. Offset by interest, offset by what other costs will go up.
Jody, do you have a comment for clarification?
I understand, with the building aid, don't we have to meet certain requirements in order to be eligible? And that means dollar costs of these projects too. So I don't know that if we were to decide to do just the ventilation itself as a project, that the dollar amount of that project would qualify for building aid. There's a chance that it wouldn't exceed the dollar amount, is that correct?
Yeah, well, there's a criteria for renovations of buildings, but air quality type projects are viewed a little more favorably, I believe, as far as building aid goes. But it's a gray area that we'd have to ask the question to get the specific answer. It's not a given.
And I also wanted to point out, which I'm going to ask when we get into talking about subcommittee preference and information, I'm going to ask Shannon at that time to talk about the CIP plan, because it's been a while since I've looked at it as closely as she has. But there are a lot of projects on that CIP plan, and as Jim alluded to, the farther out we go, the higher costs are going to be, and if we're not guaranteed building aid, I'm hesitant to put something that, in my opinion, is as important as ventilation. I'm hesitant to put it off just based on that premise alone, that we might be able to get building aid for it down the road. So, but like I said, I think Shannon will be able to give us a clearer picture on the CIP and how she feels it plays into this proposal.
Good point. Thank you, Jody. Jim, did you want to add anything more to the discussion of building
No,
aid?
I mean, I wish I could be more clear. I think, we could find the answer out for that, but I just don't know how the department would rule that. It's the law states really energy or air quality, so one would assume, but you know what happens when you assume at times. So.
Jennifer?
I just wanted to clarify, because it's pretty clear to us looking at these sheets, but it's not clear to people at home who don't see it, but that the state aid doesn't change, the percentage doesn't change no matter which plan we choose. It's still a 30%. It's 30% of the project cost on any of the plans. So, like I said, it's very clear to us because we're looking at that, but it's not clear to everybody at home who can't see that the state aid only changes because the initial amount is that much higher.
Well, while it's 30%, I mean, the building
Of
aid as it
whatever.
compounds is
Right.
different between the two plans to the tune of nearly $200,000.
Right.
But it is 30%
Of
regardless
whichever
of
amount
which
it is, right.
expenditure we make.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Further questions or clarification of the documentation? Okay. Seeing none, this time I really will feel that we all have a good grasp on this, and we'll move into the discussion of the subcommittee efforts and their understandings of options A, B, and C. And with Jody's segue, Shannon, I'd like you just to give us your perception and also how the Planning and Building Committee fits into the scheme of things here. I think it was a really good move to ask you and Lori to join this and
I
round out the
appreciate the insight
discussions.
that you, I'm really glad that we did get a chance to participate. I'm sorry Lori couldn't be here as well, because I know we really kind of shared the same feeling about participating in this project. A couple of things that we regularly look at, obviously, is, not only when we need to build a building, plan to build, but how to maintain and have a, we do review the CIP annually. By looking at this plan, we did get the opportunity to look at not only the cost savings and the utilities, but things that we were looking at for long term, being the maintenance of buildings and large capital projects. And the one thing, by looking at the large packets you had as well, we did get copies at the subcommittee, was to look at how they really kind of went through the buildings and look at the big picture. They saw, the ventilation issues, what's up to code, what's not. If it's not up to code, it means that we could be doing it better. and it will be a better environment for our students. Air quality being specifically what I'm getting at, and of course lighting quality as well, because I think we've had challenges in certain portions of other buildings. So it will be, at the end of the day, for no additional cost to the taxpayer, a neutral, it'll be a neutral cost, but it will be an environment improvement above and beyond our great expectations. And I mean, these buildings are maintained very well, but they found a way to do it even better, and that's but I think they've really come to the table. They're also looking at, when we discussed CIP and all of our plans, one of the things we talk about a lot is the JMU's office relocation as a long-term plan. Well, the first thing we talked about was ventilation and lighting, and then all of a sudden he's like, well, if you're changing the location and it changes the ventilation patterns, let's look at that move as being a possible state aid opportunity. So not just looking at us doing it for functional reasons, but making it a benefit to the taxpayer by having it 70 cents on the dollar funded, or 30 cents on the dollar funded, 70 cents by the taxpayer only. So I mean, they really looked at our long-term plans as they were looking at, these subcommittee meetings. So the big things I looked at is, at the end of the day, the taxpayer didn't pay more. At the end of the day, we exceeded basic energy goals. And at the end of the day, our CIP will be more humble in amount, because we'll be realizing savings in utilities that are guaranteed at a minimum, but could be above and beyond what's even projected in these spreadsheets. Not just operational costs, but if we're smarter in the way we manage our utilities, if we have the students buy into saving on energy, these are things that could exceed our cost to run these schools, and in that can maybe bring those projects to fruition at a lower cost on the CIP line item. So there's long term we can really make this a better school. So, and I think Jim kind of came to the table, and for every conversation we had, he talked about how their plans and some of their history with other school districts, we can realize the savings even by the state and by the taxpayer by not doing it at such a high cost. One of the things George said that I thought about was that 10 versus 12-year plan is, we don't know what the interest rate's going to be in 2 years either. So if we did have to go back and do the difference in project, it could be a higher interest rate. If we do lock in at a 4-point right now, it could be a 6-point in 2 years. So we'd be taking a risk on interest as well. So I did like, the thought of doing the 12-year, I'll be honest. We can get a lot done. We can, especially with ventilation. I think the ferry schools were first and foremost in our thoughts. They had the lowest air quality of the schools that were studied by Honeywell. But, I mean, they really kind of came together with a plan, and we can really prioritize based upon what we have planned in the CIP. They can be married in this additional funding of $750,000, and at no additional cost to the taxpayer, which is a big winner. So I definitely see the Planning and Building Committee being able to be a liaison and a holding hand in the process of planning those funds as well. We'd be glad to sit down and talk about that.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Shannon, just on the perspective of the Planning and Building Committee, or what it is that the Planning and Building, why would even invite them to the table? Jody?
Shannon, I was hoping that you could possibly go into a little bit more in-depth information regarding the proposed changes at the upper elementary school, because I know I saw the light bulb go on over your head when you started looking at this, because, and she was talking out loud saying, we were talking about changing the lighting, we were talking about the ventilation, and I know from Shannon's standpoint, when she was looking at work that we have planned to do already at JMU's, some of this would be a duplication of effort, and some of this would need to be done with that project. So if you could go into just some of that specific information, why you think it's a good idea to couple that with this energy management proposal, I'd appreciate it.
Completely. Over the last couple of years that I've served on the Planning and Building Committee, one of the things we did talk about was relocating the main office of JMU's to near where we vote. So essentially, for those at home, near the all-purpose room at JMU's. And it realized a couple of opportunities. First, it really creates a security advantage above and beyond people coming in where they are now. They would be able to be cleared through that breezeway before coming into the building. And they would be able to, in like a voting situation or an activity situation, go right into that all-purpose room. So the location becomes a security advantage, also becomes a space advantage, because there really is an opportunity where that space is that we're talking about, it's kind of like a courtyard right now. And being able to close that space would be very easy to work with. And that's kind of what we've talked about. The needs of the school were, the principal, it was Principal McGill? Yes. That took us through the school, and as we looked at it in one of our meetings, as we walked through, we kind of looked at, the layout and what it would do. It would improve a lot of areas, not just improving the office space, things like the nurse's office, improving that space. So really, it's a snowball effect on how it's going to create a positive. Honeywell said, well, based on the fact that you'd be changing the lighting and the ventilation at the same time, if we could do that, you'd be talking about 30% funding from the state to do that, which we weren't really talking about in our meetings. We were talking about doing it for safety, we were talking about doing it for efficiency, but we never really talked about how it could possibly be done more efficiently to the taxpayer. And that's the first thing that their response was, which greatly impressed me. That was my selling point, really.
Matt, we're talking about collaboration of efforts or kind of putting things together. How would any of these proposals impact the capital improvement plan for the Master Call Upper Elementary School complex that we're earmarking for next year?
Well, depending upon which plan people arrived at, let's say we look at plan number C, which gets us another $1 million worth of capital, I believe. Depending upon how much you wanted to funnel to the Master Cola Upper Elementary School. Right now in the CIP, there's 2 years worth of improvements for $1 million. So let's say you wanted to do heating, ventilation, you wanted to do the relocation of the offices, whatever that figure came out to be, that would come off of the CIP. So it would definitely reduce the CIP. How much it would reduce it by remains to be seen, but it would definitely have an impact on it.
So what we're really looking at, too, and to Jen's point about, looking at the long-term cost of it, while it's $162,000 the first year, there's additional savings that we're not seeing through the plans here simply by removing items from the capital improvement plan. If we're able to tie all of the work and planning that's been done about the improvements specifically to the upper elementary school, but in other buildings as well, I'd imagine. One of the other things that I'm thinking about are, sealing the envelopes of the buildings. While the upper elementary school, we think about security or we think about the lighting. I'm thinking about the high school and having an envelope where bats are entering the building and nesting in the ceilings. That sort of thing is different per building, but they're things that maintenance will need to address regardless of whether it's in the capital improvement plan or not. Jody?
Just to be clear, Emily, the getting rid of the bats issue, the ceiling, Shannon loves this one. The ceiling of the buildings is included in the original proposal. That wouldn't need to be done with any money. If we were to choose option C or we were to choose just option A without going for the extra capital of option C, the ceiling of the buildings is included in that. That's the basic part of the proposal. So I just wanted to make sure
I understand that. I'm on the same page with you. What I was stating is that it's something that maintenance is going to have to do, period. Regardless of whether we go with Honeywell to do this project, there's going to be a cost that the district accrues because of the little critters getting in there, and we need to eradicate them.
A lot of what we are talking about now, too, is it may not be within this year, but some of this equipment that we're talking about is ending its useful life. So some of this equipment will have to be replaced in the short term. Some of it maybe not till longer, out, several years out. But to your point, yes, some of this maintenance costs we would have to incur anyway, regardless, for replacing worn-out equipment, basically.
So I guess the big point that I was trying to make, too, is that regardless of whether it's an item that we see on the capital improvement plan that we know we're earmarking specific money for, or things that come along that our maintenance department just simply has to deal with, we're going to see cost savings in a myriad of ways, even though it doesn't appear on the charts that are before us tonight. Okay. Further questions or comments about this Planning and Building Committee or the view here? If not, Jody or George, if you would just kind of walk us through the process, your opinions, your decisions that you're your subcommittee has arrived at, and anything else that you might find useful for us. Jody?
Well, the first meeting that we held, basically we went into more detail regarding the proposal. You were given a pretty good overview by Jim as to the actual work that was going to be completed under, and I'm just talking about the basic proposal, the energy-saving proposal. Our first meeting, we went over in detail by each school with this book, and that's why I wanted you all to have a copy of that before you heard this presentation. But it goes down into very, very specific information, including photographs about the actual work that they are proposing be done. Then they go on, in addition to the work that would be done under the energy management proposal, they provided us with information. The following items were deficiencies or observations noted during the survey and should be considered for future projects. And then they listed the items in suggested order of priority. So they provided us with what was part of the energy management and what they recommended down the road should we opt to do something like option C. So we did that. We asked a lot of questions about, I learned an awful lot about heating systems, stuff that I didn't even realize I wanted to know. I learned about automatic on-off motion sensors. I learned about, we talked about in great detail about the actual work that would be done and the machinery and the things that would be installed. One of the concerns that I had was regarding lighting, because I think we do have some areas in the schools where the lighting is not sufficient, and they have basically assured me that they recognize those deficiencies also, and they plan to bring the lighting up to code. So even though we'll be receiving a cost savings because of the lighting won't use as much energy, we are actually going to have more lighting with this plan. That was a concern of mine. So that was our first meeting. Then our second meeting, we got more into the cost, the dollars and cents. And when presented with the 15-year meeting, I know the 15-year plan, I know Shannon and Lori especially had real concerns over the interest that the school district would be paying. And although they really liked the idea of getting additional money that we could apply towards capital improvements, they were not crazy about spending the extra money in interest. It didn't balance out for them. So that's when we came back and said, okay, so I think had the brilliant idea, let's try 12 years. And we said, okay, we don't have to do it in 5-year increments, let's try 12. So basically that's where the 12-year plan came up. I am in support of moving forward with an energy management proposal. I do support option C as my preference. The reasons that we've stated tonight are a lot of this equipment we're going to have to replace at some point anyway. There are things that are going to have to be done regardless. We talked about also being able to do some of this really it's going to be a wash when you talk about the dollars and cents. Without doing this work, we are not going to realize the savings. So we have to do this work in order to realize the savings. The other thing, in addition to cost savings, because of course cost savings is very attractive to me, and I've stated before, is responsible consumption of energy. I just don't see how, when given a choice of refurbishing the schools so that we are doing a better job with our energy consumption, especially in this day and age with the price of energy, I don't see how we can turn our backs on such a proposal. The other thing that really, really concerned me was the information that was presented regarding the ventilation. Although what is a priority, I think, could be deemed subjective based on personal opinion. Air quality, to me, is an important issue. Lighting is an important issue. It has to do with health. It has to do with learning environment. A lot of what we talked about, too, is making the air comfortable, making the lighting comfortable. When you have a better learning environment, I mean, we sit at our school board meetings and we're freezing. And sometimes I have a hard time concentrating on what I'm doing because I'm shivering. If you have children who are too cold, too hot, too much CO2 CO2 in the room, not enough light, you are not maximizing the learning potential of that student. So with all that said, I think I've covered everything. I am in favor of going for a 12-year plan. And again, we're talking about doing something at JMU's. Security, a secure entrance, is an issue that personally is very important to me. I have children in these schools. I was involved with the refurbishing of the entrance here at Master-Cole Elementary School a few years ago when we did that. And having a secure entrance, I watch, and even though 5th and 6th graders aren't as little, I mean, I've seen little ones head for a door. Sometimes they don't know where they're going. You really want a secure entrance, especially in this day and age when, I mean, Merrimack is a great town to live in, but we are not totally free from having situations that could occur, and having people have to be buzzed in, signed inside out. Cameras at the high school is something that I would love for us to be able to consider along with this. Security is also an issue that's important to me. I don't know that we could include that in with this or not, but if we have an opportunity to possibly take a look at it along with the Planning and Building Committee, I'm all for it. So, not get too wordy, but that's my position.
Thanks, Jody. George, what's your experience been?
Well, I don't know if I can top that. That was well covered. I guess the easiest sell for me on this was the fact that it's a wash. We're spending the money on energy. If we can improve our efficiency and break even with a guarantee from Honeywell, and if you have to write us a check, I won't feel bad about that. But I'm assuming that you guys have covered your ground well enough to ensure that you won't be writing too many checks. It's a good move for the district as far as energy efficiency. The more energy we save, obviously the more money we save. It's a no-brainer. If we can improve ventilation and move an office around and take advantage of some state aid doing that, I'm all for that as well. As Jody highlighted, some of the things we learned a lot about heating systems from compressor-driven thermostats, which I never understood or never knew quite what that box did, to going to a more advanced, I assume, digital display with precise temperature control, which will make the schools heated at the right temperature, so you won't have hot spots. There'll be more control, less problems with that control. And yeah, of course, the fact that Rose had brought up something earlier, that this actually fits in with our logic model, and the fact that we're providing a safe environment for the children. So it kind of fits in everything we're looking to do. So I was leaning towards the higher cash flow of option A, but with a few points that were brought up from various different people, interest being one, and we don't know what construction will cost. I would assume that the better option would be C, based on the fact that we have a little bit more control of the cost and we know where we're at, and the money, the savings is pretty close. It's almost about $80,000 difference. That's my take on it.
Okay. Further comment or discussion from the board? Megan, can I put you on the spot? I know that the high school has some hot spots and some cold spots because we sit in them just about every Monday on the first and third week of the month. What other things do you think students might be able to realize or really get a good benefit from if we were to put this forward to the voters and they were able to accept it?
Well, I noticed simple things that students could do every day that would be so much more beneficial. I noticed today I walked into a bathroom and all of the sinks were just running and nobody was in it. And I was like, well, that's obviously a waste, and so I turned them off. And just simple things like, I don't know if it's part of the proposal, but like automated sinks with like sensors. I think Jody touched on that. Obviously, just energy efficiency is something that can be taught throughout the schools because it's important after school. Anywhere you go, it's going to be important in your house when we get older. So I think if this were to move forward, then obviously it'll save us money, but it'll also be beneficial educating people in the importance of energy efficiency. And as you were saying, like hot spots, cold spots, you can feel the difference when you walk like into different classrooms, you can hear people being like, oh, it's so much colder in here. So I think if that is something that can be like leveled out and better managed, then it'll provide a better environment for learning. So.
I've even heard stories of teachers in the high school putting maybe perhaps a cold paper towel on top of their thermostat so that the heat will come on in their room. So I'm hoping that maybe we could just get this all evened out and you all get the same sort of learning environment without people having to resort to those sorts of measures to stay warm. Jody?
Megan just brought up a really, really good point that we talked about, too, as part of this proposal, even though it's not the nuts and the bolts. Another part of this proposal is behavior management. It's training. We're going to, as part of our energy management proposal, we are going to educate the staff, and we've got some ideas on possibly running contests. A few different ideas were tossed around, but basically on educating and training students and staff on things that they can do to basically help this effort. Simple things like turning off the water, turning off lights, which the lighting is the one of the big things that they talked about with the motion sensors and the exhaust, the ventilation in the locker rooms. You know, you don't have to have the ventilation blasting if there's nobody in the locker room. We also talked about things, I think we're doing low water consumption. They're trading out the toilets. Just you don't have to have that much water consumed. So things like that is all part of this plan. It's just not something that you're going to see black and white dollars and cents, but it's definitely, if this plan goes forward, we talked about several ideas to work with that. Shannon, go ahead.
And I believe with the toilets, it was one of the, was it J. Muse or was it Master Call Elementary that was in the CIP to change them out anyway? The bathrooms, fixtures, J. Muse. So basically we're doing what we already planned to do anyway. So that was just, again, another marriage of the two plans.
Okay. Other comments, questions? Rose?
I'd just like to make a comment on other, like, hopefully there'll be measurable costs because I'm on that committee. But yesterday, both Emily and I were a part of attending staff meetings with representing the healthcare containment committees and encouraging the staff to proactively get involved. And this is like the first major step of our program. And we put it to them in terms of proactively being more involved in healthy steps to better wellness, and which translate into less healthcare dollars spent, which translates into savings for the total cost of the district. And I know personally over the number of years that I did teach school, and I can tell you, I was a very sick person for a number of years working in unhealthy buildings. It had poor ventilation and mold in the systems, and I think even those kinds of things, I know we will realize benefits in addition to a healthier staff, much healthier children. And then the conference that Marge and I attended along with a team from the high school that had to do with working together as a team and looking at dropout prevention. And we talked about average daily attendance. And I mean, if you have kids that are healthier, they're going to have a higher likelihood of being in school. And so I think that there's, in addition to what we can see in black and white that's been presented to us, just those savings coupled with all the other maybe not as easily measured benefits, I think it would be interesting just to, at the end of the day, less tangibles, right, at the end of the day. And one comment that Jody made that really I think is a huge important piece, especially after we go home and hear the presidential address tonight, is responsible energy consumption. Because everything that I've heard today throughout the day, either on the internet or through the television, is that that is one huge area that's going to be addressed tonight, is our energy consumption as a nation and how it puts us in a dependency state, and that's going to be addressed. And I think that it's a very responsible thing for us to lead the charge in. And so thank you for bringing that up.
And to piggyback on that, I think not just at the national level, but recently in the Telegraph, I think it was Hudson was just in the news for entering a contract with Honeywell to look at their energy consumption and try to get a containment on their energy costs. If you'll remember, too, that in our special school board meeting May 24th, when we started the mini-budget workshop process, that was when we gave the charge to Marge to look at specifically our energy cost containment. And secondly, as Rose just mentioned, our healthcare cost containment, knowing that these are two things that just generally seem to spiral in our budget, and we really have had very, very little control over. Rose mentioned the intangibles. You know, certainly the health of our students, if they are able to breathe better or to pay attention better, not be drawn off task because of different environmental factors, we know that when they're in school and they're healthy, they're going to learn more regardless. The other thought that we may have is the health of our staff. If they are not as ill, not only are we not going to see things in our insurance premiums and benefits, but the cost of our substitutes that we incur. We see that through the teaching staff, but also through our maintenance staff. We know that the maintenance department incurs overtime costs for people to be out sick. So I think that that is something really tangible that we have not seen in here. Regardless of what the dollar amount may be, we can recognize that it will be something measurable, even though it's not going to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Again, that's just another layer to this. I'm supportive of any one of these options at the pleasure of the board. I do, just out of personal philosophy, tend to want shorter-term projects because I think that for example, if I were going to buy a car, I would not do a 6-year lease or 6-year term. I would do a 4-year term for that car. And that's kind of where I am between B and C. But at the pleasure of the board, and really I'd like to have a discussion, too, about the merits, first of all, between the two, and just see if we are leaning more towards including the ventilation, those options B and C packages, or if there are any board members who are really driven more towards A solely. I think we should have that awareness. Is there, Jennifer?
That leads me into my question that I had. I was looking for a breakdown on what would be covered under options B and C that would not be covered if option A was chosen. Is that somewhere in this book that I have overlooked?
It is not. We had that conversation. We talked about it a little bit before this meeting. If that's a direction that you decide that you want to pursue, then we will work with you to define, okay, with the additional budget, if you will, how do you want to prioritize the projects that fit into that? So whether that's something at the Master Cola complex in the CIP project that's there, security issues, or just strictly focusing on ventilation of, you know, can we take it school by school and see how far that'll go, that remains to be seen. So if you went with B or C, which would give you some additional funding above and beyond we've already budgeted for cost of the projects, that'll be something that we need to nail down. Based upon that, certainly Wally and I are prepared to give you some concrete options to work with there.
Okay, so when I see...
So the information's not there right now.
Jen,
okay, but
can
when
I ask Jody just for a moment for clarification?
I thought I had something to help you. And what Jim's saying is they didn't come up with something specific for the extra money. That's something that we would have to do. I don't know if we do at the subcommittee level with the school board. However, we haven't ironed that out yet because basically we have to decide which plan we're going to go with. But for some ideas, each school is broken down separately in this book, and at the end of each school, after the basic proposal on what is included in the energy management portion of the proposal, they go on to say, and it's bolded in black, Jennifer, and it's at the end of every single school proposal. Each school has the same section. Honeywell goes on to say the following items were deficiencies or observations noted during the survey and should be considered for future projects. The items are listed in a suggested order of priority, and the construction cost and energy cost of these items have not been estimated. The items below are not part of the current proposed project, which would be A.
Okay.
Okay?
All right. That was
and then they
one of
go
my
on
questions.
to list,
And the one that drew my attention over and over again, and especially the ferry schools, was the ventilation. Like I said, I don't know for roughly $750,000 how much we are going to, I'm fairly confident we can take care of ventilation. These other projects, we don't know for sure. We're just talking about things that are in the works that possibly we could include with this extra money for Plan C, but nothing definite. That would have to be decided upon as a group. I'm not sure, like I said, the logistics of how, but if you're looking for the information that I was presented with, it's, if you go through, you're going to have to go through every school and go to the end under the black highlighted, and for almost every school, we are not up to code on ventilation, and that was the one that struck me the most.
Marge?
I think, based on the subcommittee meetings that we had, as Jim points out, the pieces that really came to the fore, we're trying to go back and look at the capital improvement plan as regards J. Muse, because that's already listed. We've gone before the planning board now at least, Matt, haven't we gone at least 2 or 3 times? And what we said is we were going to be about doing an energy management audit, and off that audit, we would have some specificity to it. So one obligation we definitely have is, if and when we go back to the planning board with anything regarding J. Muse, we have to be very concrete about what all of its parts are, and we would specify what is being handled through this project and what remains to be done. That, to me, is a promise we made, and I'd like it fulfilled. But at the same time, we never said anything to the planning board or anyone else really about ventilation, because we've not really had a study quite like this done in a long period of time. So I think it means going back, pulling out those pieces, seeing what remains, just because that's already there in the plan. At the same time, putting a cost to all the ventilation pieces, and then trying to see what it is we can do with those cost savings. Because it might be that ventilation is more important, and we say that to the planning board. But I really would like to at least have that looked at in depth, because I feel like we owe that to the planning board.
Jen?
Yeah, so I guess my question is, because I see it on the glossary as well, that you can see the not currently part of the proposed budget, and it's listed out in that glossary also. And that's very helpful. Is the ventilation is not included in option A at all? So
well, I mean, there's ties to it. I mean, we're putting upgrading a lot of controls on ventilation equipment. When we're talking ventilation specifically here, largely it's saying where you do not have ventilation now to bring in outside air mechanically into the building, exchange it, exhaust it. Every building except the middle school, you have significant deficiencies to do that.
And then with the drafts that you were referring to earlier, especially at the high school, is that addressed in option A?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I think
that will be part of the building envelope.
Yeah.
Yes.
The things that and it's pretty clearly laid out in there, but it's largely the bulk of those costs, the bulk of the items is things dealing with, well, in this building, you really have, the only ability you have to ventilate really is to exhaust air out. So you think of your home bathroom, you got an exhaust fan that just pulls the moisture or the air out of there at times that you need to run it. So you have exhaust systems throughout this complex, really the whole thing. For the most part, you have some ventilation mixed in here and there, but you have very limited ability to bring in air from the outside into the occupied space, the classroom, for example. So that's where you have a deficiency. And the deficiency, which we talk about at the committee, is really saying, okay, what's the current code? And the desired state in this case is the middle school. The middle school has met the current code levels. And so if you use that as your baseline or your desired state, and then you compare all the other buildings to that, that's where we're pointing out those deficiencies from. And so you're with both the ferry schools, the Master Cola complex, and then a decent chunk of the high school, you have some areas you have, again, no ability to bring air into the space outside of opening a window if you have an operable window.
Jody?
I just, wanted to make clear, too, I don't know if possibly this is a question that people might have. The ventilation is not included in Plan A because Plan A is all about energy management and cost savings, and the ventilation would not be part of cost savings energy management. But they looked at the entire school, as Marge said, in a way that we haven't had done in years, and made recommendations on things that they felt were important or that we should at least be notified about. So the ventilation's not in Plan A because, technically it's not energy containment or cost savings, but it is something, in my opinion, that needs to be done.
And we would recommend that you do it. How you do it, whether it's with us or another means, that's up for you to determine, but it's certainly something that should be considered at some point in time.
And I think to paraphrase from the minutes of our meeting on the 18th when Jim and Wally came before us, whether it was option A as we see it here or the 15-year plan, the items that were addressed specifically as items to be addressed were aging of the mechanical systems and the building envelope upgrades, upgrading of the lighting systems to include a significant utility rebate for that portion, upgrading the sinks and toilets to low-flow mechanisms, temperature control upgrades, converting, I believe, 3 of the buildings to natural gas. Is that correct, Jim?
Yeah.
Reed's Ferry would not be converted because of the length of the pipeline that would be need to...
Maintenance building, the superintendent's office and special services, so.
Okay. Variable speed motors, also including an energy management curriculum as the last part of the audit. The ventilation piece was something that was noted as a deficiency through their audit system. We do have the ability to vent air out, but not enough to recirculate or generate the fresh air that we need within the buildings. So it's really just a one-way system right now. This is something that would just be an added benefit and hopefully help our management of the outside intangible things as well.
I got one thing I'd like to add to that. Just because we're not saying that we're not going to do any ventilation, that's really not true. Use this room, for example. You have a ventilation unit for this unit that has a capability of bringing in a certain amount of outside air. It may not be enough if you fill this room up full of students or whatever, but it has a capability of some outside air. When we do the control work on this unit, we will bring this unit up to the maximum of what it is capable of doing. Right now, tonight, and most of the time, it's not bringing in any outside air because the way the controls have been set up, the lack of being able to control it with the older controls that way is not set up to do that. But if we put DDC controls on this, and this unit is capable of bringing in even 10% outside air when it's 0 degrees outside, this will happen. That's calculated into our project. If you have classrooms that have univents in them and we're putting controls on them, we will bring them up. It may not be code compliant because they may not be able to do it. The coils may not be able to handle 0 degree air. They may only be able to handle 30-degree air, but we will be doing CO2 control. This room will do CO2 control. If there's only 10 people in here, you'll be bringing in a small amount of outside air. If there's 100 people in here, you may not be bringing in enough for 100 people. You may only be bringing in code-wise enough for 25 because that's all that's designed for right now, but we will bring it up to its maximum of what it can do. When we talk about controls or ventilation, would be going into classrooms that have no ventilation, no forced ventilation at all, putting in units that will bring in code-compliant ventilation and stuff like that. Even at times, we'd recommend probably changing out this unit and putting in a new unit that could be bringing in code-compliant air for this whole space. So you'll be getting some ventilation out of the option A or the 10-year project or the energy savings project. You'll be getting better ventilation than what you have. Will it be 100% code compliant? No, probably not. because your systems can't, not all of them can handle that. I just want to clarify that. It sounds like all we're doing is, or as it's going around the table, all we're doing is just trying to save energy. Yes, that's what we're trying to do, but we're trying to do it not at the cost of taking ventilation out of the buildings that's already here, that's capable of doing it. It's at the cost of, because there's some, you might say, negative savings already been taken, because we know that this unit isn't bringing in any outside air. We know it's capable of bringing in some outside air, and when we put controls on it, it is going to be brought up to do what it can do. As I said, maybe not to code, but it will be brought up to do what it can do with that code, with our DDC controls, with our CO2 controls in rooms like this. So I just wanted to clarify that. It sounded to me like people didn't think we was doing anything for ventilation. We are. Are we doing 100% what we should be doing? You can't afford that right now. But we're going to give you everything we can with what you have to do with. And if you want to go to option C, I guess it is, with some extra money, then we can pick on certain areas of different buildings, well, I would suggest, that have no ventilation at all, and do something with those, because an area like this does have ventilation, and it may not be 100% adequate, but at least you've got some ventilation here. Not only that, students are not here, a large group all day long, like they are in classrooms. So.
Jennifer?
In the classrooms, all of them are there any classrooms that do not have windows that open for outside air? Is there a lot?
If you took a tour, and I'm sure when Honeywell did the audit, they walked in some cases, we've created spaces where you might not have an access window. I'm thinking internal. And I couldn't tell you exactly how many there are, but you went through when you did the audit, so you know specifically.
You're correct.
So there are, yes.
Yeah.
There are some areas that have been taken. It's typical. I don't know as I can name one right off the top of my head, but it's typical in schools as your population grows, but the building don't, that you take custodian's closet, make an office. You take storage closets and make them a small classroom that's for special ed or something like that for 1 or 2 students, part-time. Those are the areas that you would not have any ventilation. They didn't have any before, other than maybe exhaust, or wouldn't have a window. I mean, I've seen times you take a storage place like you got right here and make that into a coach's office or something like that, and that has happened. So windows are not always in every one of the rooms. Not only that, you think about windows, really to code, if you have an adequate size window, you don't need ventilation in a building. But how many people are going to open a window the right amount when it's 0 degrees outdoors and bring in ventilation? It's not likely that that's going to happen.
Right. Thanks.
Further questions? Okay. Let me ask a course of action. Matthew, what do you need from the board this evening?
Well, in order to present the warrant articles to the Budget Committee on the 31st of January, we would be appreciative if the board would settle on a plan, say what the term is, and then vote on the warrant article, so we could give that recommendation to the Budget Committee.
Okay. Let's do this then. Let's entertain 2 separate motions. One would be for the support of a particular option, and let's be sure to have certain discussion for consensus building before that point. And then the last portion of this would be to approve a warrant article to move to the Budget Committee as the second aspect to this. George?
Is it possible to do Plan C in 10 years? And still give you the ability to offer the district a 0 cost or a wash?
You'd go, well, based upon, I talked about the tangible numbers, you'd go into the red at the bottom, just by being able to, if you kept the same project amount and condensed those payments in 10 years, your annual amount's going to go up enough. Without running the numbers, I know this will be the case where you get into the red. So you'd have to then say, okay, do we have some money in the operating budget that would offset that. So, you know, we're laying out financial scenarios, and there's certainly a lot of flexibility to change those around and run them however you want. I know some districts have even said, gee, we know we have this debt service payment for a building that's going away. You know, 3 years down the road, let's incorporate a balloon payment in to make that happen. So,
do we have any capital improvement money for any of the CIP projects? Do we have any money set aside for any of those?
And like capital reserve
funds?
No, but even if you did, you can't
expend
you can't fund a lease purchase with capital reserve funds except for the last payment, I believe. So you couldn't do it.
When do you think we'd get into the red? Would it be the first couple of years, or would it be right towards the end? Or
I honestly don't know. I'd have to run it. I'd be happy to do that and get you that information. But I would be speculating, and I'm not comfortable doing that. So.
Yep, I understand.
And I don't know that I'd be comfortable doing that, projecting or anticipating that a board outside of our own would have to come up with that money 9 or 10 years from now,
right,
and have to make that decision based on depending
on how significant
what we've done.
Be. I mean, if it was $50,000, you know, that's one thing. But if it ends up being $200,000 or $300,000, that's quite a different thing.
I mean, either way, I think it's our responsibility to pass on to subsequent boards responsible decision making where we believe in the project as it's presented and feel that we do have a win-win situation where we're not putting any future boards at jeopardy. Are there any other questions or comment? Jennifer?
You asked if there was any board members that were leaning one way or the other on any of these options, and I myself was leaning towards option A for the same reason that you had stated about the shorter length of term, but also just in the interest of trying to keep the cost down to, you know, and give the most money back to the voters and to the taxpayers of the town. That was my reasoning for leaning towards option A at this point.
Jody?
As I've stated, I'm in favor of option C. I don't know that option A really over the course of the 10 years will end up giving that much money back to the voters. I think for reasons we've talked about, construction costs increasing, interest rates increasing, work that has to be done that will need to be done at some point in time anyway. I don't honestly believe that option A in the long run is going to return more money to the taxpayers' pockets. I personally don't believe that to be the case. I support option C for all the reasons that I stated. I believe it's really the responsible thing for us to do, and I see option C as a win-win because it is going to be a wash. We aren't going to have to raise taxes in order to accomplish many, many goals that our school district has set. So that's my opinion on that.
And to add to that, Jody, some of those goals that we've set, we would need to put out for warrant article or through, you know, certainly if we wanted to have a capital reserve fund set up for things like, you know, specific building upgrades with security or other upgrades that we have down the line that we're thinking about. So, I mean, Jennifer, when I said I was looking between the two, I was really looking between B and C as that energy piece. And A being the baseline. I would rather have A than absolutely nothing. But in thinking about the way that we've folded in so many other pieces here, and to see that option C does have a higher cash flow than the others, even though you are expending more in interest, we're realizing more cash flow at the end of the time. So that's why not only I concur with Jody on the other points that she raises about C, but I do see that there is a little bit more of a financial benefit for going to that 12-year proposal.
I'm not sure about the cash flow. Maybe I'm missing something. I see on option A the total cash flow is $309,000.
She's comparing B and C, Jennifer.
B and C. Where B and C both fold in the ventilation.
That makes sense to me, but it's about $80,000 different. But it's 2 years less.
Jody?
The cash flow on C is greater because you're taking a longer period of time to pay off the loan. So you're making larger payments on option B because it's only 10 years, so your payments are going to be higher, so your cash flow is going to be less on option B than on option C. Correct, but your cash flow technically is going to be smaller on B.
Are we correct, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard for me to give an opinion on this because I think some of this is philosophical, and I don't want to really butt into that. I think, you know, I can I could say this, that if you know that these capital issues are seriously going to be things you want to fund, then I think you can put together a financial picture to support, you know, I never even thought of the interest rate, you know, question. I think interest rates are relatively in a historically low period now. Who knows when that ends? You know, you have building aid. You know that costs are going to continue to go up, and if you can avoid some of those CIP monies, move other things up to the front of the list, you can put some pretty sound logic around that. But you know, I don't want to...
I didn't mean to put you on the spot philosophically. I really just meant if we looked at the bottom corner of both of those plans...
I'll turn my
That's
mic
okay.
off.
I'll let you squirm for just a minute. If we looked at that bottom right corner on option B and option C, the cash flow on option B is $159,410 at the end of the 10-year program.
Mm-hmm.
Again, in the lower right, the total program cash flow under option C is $220,160.
Yeah. The one that you have, the sheet, and it was noted, is option B doesn't have the building aid calculation right. The one I have on the screen here now is correct. That's a little lower, the one you have. Yeah. So it's 194 versus 220. Keep in mind you're talking 10 years versus 12 years. So, you know, if you took the 2 years away, then you're going to have a different cash flow at the end of the comparison here.
Okay. Can you give me that number, please?
Yeah, you're doing more money. Yeah.
194,964.
And that's a replacement for which number?
Yeah. And that was simply because I had, in this option B, you have $3,608,167 as the project cost. I didn't transfer over until our meeting prior to this the updated 30% amount on that. So that's why that jumped up. So the total building aid on this would be $1,082,450, which is 30% of that number.
Okay, so they're not as significant as I just mentioned. However, there is still roughly $26,000 difference there. My question is that only because in extending the life to a 12-year lease purchase, we would also be counting the 2 years' worth of energy or cost avoidance factors?
I think the answer to your question, let me try to attempt to answer it. You're comparing somewhat of an apple and orange here.
Okay.
The 194 is a project of $3.6 million at a 10-year net cash flow. The option C is almost $4.3 million at a 12-year net cash flow of the 220. So if you took option B and then I extended that out 2 more years,
yes,
that cash flow is going to be significantly higher because those payments in 11 and 12 year aren't there, falls to the bottom line, so it's a bigger number. So you're balancing a cash flow at the end versus a larger capital amount that you can invest in the year 2007.
So what perhaps I should be looking at is the missing column on option C for fiscal year 17-18.
Yeah.
Fiscal year 18-19. But if I were to compare option C at the 10-year point to option B at the 10-year point, I would see that the cash flow would be significantly less for option C.
Yeah, it would be significantly less, meaning option B would, if you compared it 10 years to 10 years, option B, getting myself confused here, is going to have a better cash flow, simply because you're financing two different amounts of money, and one is being paid off in 10 years versus the other 12 years. So if you're looking at comparison of what's the net cash flow at the end of the term in B versus C, it's not necessarily an accurate comparison without considering the 2 years extra in financing and the fact that you've got different project amounts that are being financed.
Okay. Jody?
I just want to put, personally, I don't see a huge difference between A and B. B is going to, we're only going to realize about $118,000 that we could use extra for capital improvements.
Okay.
That's it. Option C is going to be about, what was it, $750,000? 745. So to me, there's not a huge difference between option A and B.
Okay.
Not enough that would make me choose option B over A, to be honest with you. There's not $120,000. While, yes, we could do some work with that, I don't think it's a significant amount of money enough to borrow more, to be honest with you. So personally, I would be looking at either A or C, not B.
And Shannon, was it my understanding that you were supportive of option C?
And I am supportive of option C, specifically for the difference between B and C being $530,000 to improve the schools with.
Okay. George, of the three plans, through your work with the subcommittee, where are you lying in your decision making?
Well, I was leaning towards option A originally, and after listening to some arguments by fellow board members as well as Planning and Building Committee member Shannon Barnes, I am leaning more towards C at this point.
Okay. Rose, do you want to weigh in?
Given the choice between option A and option C, I would choose option C because I feel like it's a more big picture plan, and it really takes care of, in addition to, you know, the basic things, it addresses other issues in the CIP that need to be dealt with.
Okay. Jennifer, do you want any further discussion?
I guess what I'm looking for is assurance that option C is still a wash to our taxpayers. That's really my main concern at this point, is we're going to them and asking them for more money.
There's, it's still a wash. The only difference is you're going to borrow money for 2 extra years, but in exchange for that, you're going to be able to do more stuff up front in your buildings that you're going to probably be facing finding the dollars to do that anyways. So
with the way I'm reading it, it's the same initial investment. The $162,000.
It's still a budget neutral, net neutral. It's not going to cost. If you did, let me answer it this way: if you did nothing, you're going to still spend the same money, whether you did this project.
Right.
And you're going to spend that in the form of, you know, continuing to spend money to Keyspan and to Irving Oil and to PSNH,
right.
And miss out on the opportunity to get additional aid from the state and some rebate money. So this plan, to your question, it's 10 years or 12 years. You're going to spend the same money with or without it. It's just how you spend the money.
So it's the same amount of money on that warrant article, no matter which plan we're presenting to the voters. Okay.
Right. The warrant article that came in our packet would be what would be printed on the ballot.
Okay.
And regardless of the plan that we choose, that's the wording that would be put forth on the ballot.
It's just filling in that how many year lease agreement.
Exactly, whether it would be 10-year or 12-year. Rose?
Just to clarify, that payment is actually going to be generated through initial savings.
Correct.
Right off the bat. So this money that's going to make this first payment is not money that will have to be generated by tax. I mean, it is money that's being generated by tax revenue, but it was going to have to be generated anyway. Is that correct? Because we would have been generating it to pay for
Utility costs.
utility costs. We would be raising this money anyway. We're not raising this money in addition.
I'd have to disagree with that theory, because then we wouldn't have a need for a warrant article if that was the case.
That's not correct.
You're going to see it as a return in your revenue?
Yeah, what's going to happen is you have to have the warrant article to make the commitment as far as the lease goes, and you have to show an amount in the first year.
Okay.
Because we haven't reduced our operating budget by $162,000, you're going to be raising another $162,000. So what that's going to do to your budget is you're going to have the savings. It's going to be returned to reduce taxes the following year.
Right. Got it. Thank you.
Jody?
I mean, there's really no way around that. That's something we have to do if we're going to move forward with this.
No, and I
But that
agree with
is
that.
money that we will realize in savings.
Yeah, because if we took the money out of the budget now and the warrant article failed, we wouldn't have enough money to pay the heating costs for the building.
Right.
So it's one of those things.
I recognize that.
And I think the other point that was raised earlier, too, is in putting it to ballot at this point, too, Matt has some leverage there if we should desire that we want to put that $162,000 towards principal. That would be an option for us, Matt?
That's the way the financing is.
set up,
Certainly an
right?
option for you, and that's the way it's set up, yes.
So that, I'm just saying, that's a possibility
Correct.
for us, but we would have that as another
Yeah.
idea in the back of our heads.
My understanding, though, is we are not sure yet about early payment.
I think the way Jim has structured this, correct me if I'm wrong, that the $162,000 first payment knocks down the amount that we have to borrow.
Borrow.
Yes.
Okay.
But any future payments towards
We'd have to
principal,
kind
that's
of
what
get
we
some
don't know
terms
about.
on what that will,
Yeah.
if we decide to pay, if we have, say, another $20,000 or $50,000 savings that we didn't plan on, something, one of those intangibles that we're not counting on. If we were able to pay more money to reduce the principal amount, thus saving the taxpayers' interest money, we'd have to kind of find out if that's an acceptable agreement with the finance company. Some loans will allow for that, and some loans will not allow for early payment.
Right, that's something Jim needs to check out.
That's correct, yeah. That's something that would need to be negotiated up front contractually between.
And that would essentially be a board decision. That's not out of our control. Correct, Matt? Okay. Further discussion? Seeing none. Is there anyone who would like to put a motion forward at this time for the option? Help me with the wording here. For the selection of option A, B, or C as the preferred lease buy program for the district to enter into with Honeywell? George?
Motion for option C.
Is there a second? By Jody. Is there any further discussion to come before us on this motion? Okay. Seeing none, we'll put the question to the vote. All those in favor, so signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposition? Abstention? Student rep's position? Motion carries 5-0-0. Student rep recorded in favor of option C. The second task that we have before us at this time is to move the warrant article. Is there anyone who would like to move the warrant article, a special warrant article that reads, shall the district vote to authorize the school board to enter into a 12-year lease agreement for the purpose of energy efficiency upgrades to district facilities and to raise and appropriate the sum of $162,362 for the first year's payment for that purpose. This lease agreement contains an escape clause, and majority vote is required. Is there a motion to move that to the ballot?
I will make that motion.
George, thank you. Is there a second? By Jody.
Everyone unsure on that? You guys look a little,
Rose must be cold.
you all looked a little, like, confused there. I was like, is there something I'm not getting?
2 motions in one night, George. Okay. Any discussion on the motion? The warrant article before us? Seeing none, we'll put the question to a vote. All those in favor in moving the article supporting a 12-year lease agreement to the ballot as printed, so signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? Abstention? Student rep's position? Motion carries 5-0-0. Student rep recorded in favor. Very good. Thank you all for coming this evening, for the extra effort and time that you've graciously given to the school district and school board of Merrimack.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. And we'll be in contact with you soon.
Okay.
Rose?
In the event that this article is passed by the voters on April 11th, I would like to recommend that we have an ongoing committee that, we're going to have some decision-making to make in tandem with recommendations by Honeywell, and also being guided by planning and building as to, in tandem with their projects and how we can interface. And I just think, that we've already seen that, breaking out with the subgroup, getting more information has certainly been of benefit to us. And I would just like to make the recommendation that we either continue with this committee and to keep it going and to oversee this very far-reaching project.
Marge?
I just want you to know that we'd had a discussion with Jim and Wally earlier with the idea that if the board approved this tonight, I think it makes good sense for the board to also have a notion about how it might want to use the cost savings and what would be the priority areas, so that when we go to the deliberative session, people have a good idea about, so what will happen. And to that end, we're going to do a very tight turnaround and probably come back and use the subcommittee if it would be willing to do that, but at least bring back to the board what would seem to be those areas that need to be addressed, so that a voter clearly realizes where the board is going. Otherwise, it leaves too much for conjecture.
Rose?
And as a follow-up to that, as we were flipping through it, I noticed certainly, I've felt the same way as Jen. It's like, okay, I see this on this page, and okay, this is here, and this is here. And I was wondering possibly either if, it would be something that you guys will be willing to do for us, which basically to be like either a spreadsheet or a listing of the areas and like all of the ventilation together, all of this and all of that, or possibly provide us with a disk that has all this information so we can extract it easily instead of, reinventing the wheel, going through and trying to figure it all out on our own. Okay, all right, I'll give you, okay, you do the work. Yeah. Now, would that be included, would that be an additional cost to us for you guys to provide us with some? Yeah.
Any cost of the project?
Marge?
And maybe proposed costs of projects or range of costs for projects. That would, I know that's probably a lot more.
The more feedback we can get on that, I think the more constructive.
Yeah.
There's so many different things there, and
I know we can't do it all with this amount of money.
And the 750 will take you to a point, but you have a lot of things there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, when you're dealing with this kind of stuff, none of it's cheap. And,
Right.
You get into ventilation, you get into structural issues, electrical upgrades. There's a whole host of things that your existing buildings may not support. And then if we're talking security or trying to be creative on how we take CIP money and maximize the building opportunities for you, lots of planning, lots of discussion there. We're committed to that process. We'd be happy to participate in additional meetings. But we'll certainly welcome more feedback so we can give you information that is exactly what you're asking for. But selfishly is we're not running around putting multiple scenarios. Just to do the design and the pricing of this, to give you a pretty accurate reflection. It's a considerable amount of time to do that. And selfishly, I not to say by any stretch of the imagination it's not part of what we're going to do for you. But I can't underestimate the time it takes to give you a solid number of ventilation. It's a lot of design time. It's a lot of number crunching. It's hundreds and hundreds of hours beyond what we've already wanted to do, which we're committed to doing, but we certainly are receptive to dialogue and try to nail this down to what realistically is of interest to you, and perhaps that's more us talking more about it, educating about something.
Marge?
I was just going to say, I think we've got multiple audiences that we have to share some pretty complex information with, meaning the next step in the process is the Budget Committee. So we are in a week's time. We've already talked to Jim and Wally about that. And then we've got to turn around and figure out what we're going to present to the voters for March 7th. Because, again, it looks very simple if you look at 2 or 3 lines in a warrant. But the fact of the matter is, it really is complex. Look at the discussion that this board has had tonight, and we've had an energy subcommittee that's been working with it too. So we have got to take very complex information and turn it around so that it makes sense. And then I think you were asking for some information too, so we really need to then look at what we put in a voter's guide. So all that's got to happen in a very short span of time. But the good thing is they're willing to work with us to that end. So I think what we'll do is first try and figure out what those priority areas might be so that you can look at those, and then take and try and get the information compacted so that it makes sense to people.
The 750, to Marge's point, extra, we're committed to giving you some concrete options. We're looking at how we use our buildings, how would we prioritize that. We certainly welcome your feedback. I mean, one thing that we thought about is we may be able to do total building solutions versus partial solutions. And what I mean by that is maybe we look at Reed's Ferry, Gordon's Ferry, and we do those entire buildings, complete ventilation there. Is that a better way to just do a little part here, a little part there? We don't know, but that's where the initial thing is. We welcome the feedback. Guidance on those solutions.
Further comments? Seeing none, thank you once again. We appreciate your time. The last item on our agenda this evening is a housekeeping item really for us. What we need to consider is the operating budget warrant article. Again, on the 20th of December, we voted on appropriating or recommending a budget amount to the Budget Committee that was not quite part to whole. What we need to do is pull the whole packet together and to have the language that the Budget Committee will receive on the 31st for review of their budget warrant articles. As a housekeeping item, what we needed to consider was putting the part to whole, and that is to put forward the pieces of the budget that were encumbered through voter decisions in the past. And the warrant article would read, operating budget article, shall the district raise and appropriate as an operating budget, not including appropriations by special warrant articles and other appropriations voted separately, the amounts set forth on the budget posted with the warrant or as amended by vote of the first session for the purposes set forth therein, totaling $59,215,213. Should this article be defeated, the operating budget shall be $59,985,208, which is the same as last year, with certain adjustments required by previous action of the district or by law, or the governing body may hold one special meeting in accordance with RSA 4013, Roman numeral 10 and Roman numeral 16, to take up the issue of a revised operating budget only. A majority vote would be required. And a note, this warrant article, the operating budget, does not include appropriations in any other warrant articles. Could I have a motion to move this to ballot as submitted? So made by Rose, second. By Jody. Further discussion? Jennifer?
I guess if you can just forgive my ignorance, and this question is going to be, how does this happen? How do we put this on the ballot if the Budget Committee has not made their recommendations and if they make some changes to the budget?
Well, in order to present this to the Budget Committee, we need your recommendation. If they make changes to this, we would bring it back to you to see if you still recommend it. If it gets to the deliberative session and it's changed, you would vote probably after the deliberative session to recommend or not recommend, depending upon what happens.
Right. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Seeing none, we'll put the question to the vote. All those in favor of moving the operating budget article as written to the ballot, so signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposition, abstention, student rep's position. Motion carries 500, student rep recorded in favor. That concludes our agenda this evening. We have no portion that is public participation or comments. Could I have a motion to adjourn? So made by Jennifer, second by Jody. All those in favor of adjourning, so signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 500.
Oh, come on, it's not 11 o'clock. No.
Thank you so much for changing.
I feel a lot better. You know, when I left here, I had 102-degree fever.
Oh, good.
That's great.
I got home, and a friend of mine who was a PA came up and was like, yeah, where's your thermometer? I'm like, I got a beep one down there.
Oh, yeah. That might be appropriate, George.
You're like, where's my thermometer? I'm like, I don't have one. So she ran out to CVS, gets a thermometer. Yeah, okay, you're going to not go to work tomorrow. You have 102-degree fever. Yeah.
That's why I'm glad I signed the manifest before I handed it to him. We did. We set Jennifer up.
That's all right. I already had bronchitis at that point.
Couldn't made you any worse.
No, I ended up with bronchitis.
Who's this? I haven't had a fever in a long time. Yeah, I had like malaria victim.
Thank you for changing our venue. It was nice and warm in here.
Fields that we use because they've just about surrendered it or failed miserably during the 2 years that we had meetings on a monthly basis with Ed Chase and Company. It was the agenda was never changed after the last 6 months because things never got done. Then Mike Milligan, acting town manager, decided to put it in the hands of the Parks and Recreation Department, and that plan was going to come into fruition coming this spring. And we don't want to see that cut short. We'd like to see they give that a run. Well, we'd be terribly disappointed if we're back with the Department of Public Works. They certainly couldn't manage taking care of the MYA building as a clerk of the works because they had too many other things to do. I can't possibly see how they could maintain all the fields during the summertime. That's the first thing they complain about. They don't have help, and they can't take care of our needs. So something to consider. Be happy to speak with you at length about it at another time, but I just wanted to plant that seed at this time.
Finley, I saw you with your hand up. Can I jump in real quick? Because I have been something I've been dying to say all night. In fact, I've been dying to say it since I talked to Keith a couple of days ago. And it's something that's going to sound kind of bizarre. And before you really say anything, I recommend you say nothing and give it some thought. What if you were to come up, what if cutting edge, if our goal at Merrimack is to always find a smarter way to do things and improve the quality of life, and we have all these volunteers, what if you were to go with a proposal to the town manager for the MYA as a volunteer body to take over the position of the Director of Parks and Rec? Keep knowing that you have other things besides the MYA, but because then you can have your cake and eat it too. There's nothing like being the top dog. But what if there was a way to say, we're going to be responsible for everything, but our volunteers will assure that everyone gets taken care of, and that way you don't ever have to be out in the cold. And I know it's a bold thing, but I'm just saying it's a thought. I mean, because you are a big part of the project. That's all. Just throwing it out there, and I know it sounds crazy, but thought it'd be something to think about. Finley?
I just was wondering, Terry and Mike, if you, I sit currently, believe it or not, in the school district budget committee, and they're beginning that process of going through their budget, the school district's budget. There was discussion and has been discussion about the overtime maintenance, the maintenance overtime line item and the potential of that being cut. Currently, the school district covers, I think it was $24,000 in overtime costs that covers games and all that type of thing. If in fact that's cut, would that be something that the MYA would be able to absorb in some fashion?
Sure. We come back to the town and increase our budget. That's pretty much what we do. We cut it out of the budget through our basketball program, did away with that as a line item expense. But if the school district is back to charging us, we would add that in as a line item expense as we have in the past, to be perfectly
The reason we got rid of that was people realized you were taking it from one pocket and put it in the other.
Right.
And so they decided just to eliminate it. If it went back, we would just play that same shell game. If you're going to get charged for gym time, somebody has to pay for it.
Right, and I just didn't know how that might be, and that hasn't happened, and I don't know whether or not it will, but I know it has been chatted about.
That emanated from the school board. That was not an MYA request of the school district. That was them coming forward to us and us working out an agreement that obviously would be in our best interest. So I don't want you to think that we had any interest in trying to get the jump on anybody or get any financial gains from it. Basketball immediately dropped that as an expense item.
Right. Yeah. Anything else? No. What I'd like to do, guys, is since you're comfortably sitting in those seats and you're kind of here as commentators anyways, just to give your opinions, per se, why don't you from there take your 5 minutes and give us your opinion? You've already alluded a little bit about your feelings on park maintenance, but this is your opportunity to be heard, and then from there we'll bring Ernie and Bruce back up. So we have now moved from Parks and Recreation to Parks Maintenance.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Ruggiero. That's part of his charge as the MYA Vice President, and then I'll chime in as I feel.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a copy of that budget in front of me, so Parks Maintenance? Yeah. Oh, wait. Okay, thanks. Oh, we actually did review this, Bruce. We reviewed this. Yeah. As it's submitted to you, Dave, we were in agreement with the cuts and said this would be our, yes, we can get away with these things for another year, and this makes sense. So we did not have any issues with this at all.
Okay. All right, well, thank you guys very, very much.